This happened to me just over a year ago. I'm 25 years old and own a small townhouse in a quiet neighborhood. I live by myself, which can get pretty dull, so I often invite friends over whenever I can. My closest friends visit a couple of times a week and sometimes even spend the night to get away from their own homes. I didn't have any plans for this night, but I had made plans for the following day with my friend, Lisa, who was supposed to come over for a movie night. I was really just trying to get through this night. Looking forward to the next day, I went to bed early, around 9:15 p.m. In the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up. I glanced at my bedside clock. It was 2 a.m. The way I woke up was strange. My heart was racing, and my mind was unusually sharp, as if something was wrong. I thought maybe I just had a bad dream or something, but then I heard a click coming from downstairs. I sat up in bed as a door slowly creaked open, and I heard footsteps entering my home. Despite being scared, I thought it might be Lisa or another friend since they all had keys to my place in case they needed somewhere to crash. I got out of bed, opened my bedroom door, and stepped into the hallway. "Lisa," I called out. No one answered. I stood in the hallway for what felt like forever. But then, suddenly, a bright light flickered on, lighting up the hallway downstairs. A second later, I heard a faint murmur of voices coming from the living room. Whoever it was had turned on the TV. For a moment, I felt relieved, thinking it had to be one of my friends who had maybe had too much to drink. I walked down the stairs and into the living room, but as soon as I did, I felt my entire body go cold. A random man was sitting on my couch, staring at the TV. He looked about 50 years old, with long, scraggly black hair and dirty clothes. As I stood there, frozen in fear, he turned his head, glanced at me, and gave me a crooked smile. He even waved his hand, as if inviting me to sit down next to him on the couch. I didn't hesitate. I spun around and ran out the front door as fast as I could. I pounded on my neighbor's door until they let me in and called the police. By the time they arrived, though, the man was gone. No sign of him at all. What made it worse was that the police didn't take it seriously, suggesting it was probably just a harmless homeless man looking for a place to stay. But I see it differently. The man picked the lock on my door, sat on my couch, turned on the TV, and then smiled at me like that, as if he knew me. I think he might have been stalking me or something, and now, every time I'm alone at night, I can't help but wonder if I'm really alone. I've lived in this house for almost a decade now. It's a standard, medium-sized home, which made sense when I shared it with others. But after they left and I was the only one living here, the extra space felt unnecessary. Technically, it's a 3-bedroom house, but I only use 2 rooms, one as my bedroom and the other as my game room. The third room is at the far end of the upstairs hallway. One has a few storage boxes, and the other is completely empty. One night, after finishing work at around 9 p.m., I grabbed some fast food on the way home and went straight to the game room. I was off the next day, so I planned to play video games all night. I put on my headphones and started a game, but just before I got into a match, I thought I heard something like a knock at the front door. I took off my headphones and listened, but when I didn't hear anything else, I figured if someone was really there, they would knock again. So I went back to my game. About an hour or 2 later, I heard it again. It sounded like a faint knock or maybe a door closing, but with my headphones on and the door to my room shut, it was hard to tell. I got up and opened my door, peering into the hallway, waiting to hear the sound again. When nothing happened, I went downstairs to check the front door. No one was there and everything seemed normal. Feeling uneasy, I made sure the door was locked before heading back upstairs. This time, I left my room door open, hoping I might hear the sound more clearly if it happened again. I put my headphones back on and resumed gaming. I played through an entire round, which took about 20 minutes. As the game ended, I leaned back in my chair, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure dart past the open doorway. I ripped off my headphones and jumped out of my chair, frozen in fear, unsure of what to do next. I stood there for several minutes before finally gathering the courage to check the hallway and then the rest of the house. No one was there, but the front door was unlocked again. When the police came to investigate, they discovered that someone had been hiding, likely living, in the empty room at the end of the hallway. I hadn't been in that room for weeks, maybe even months, so all this time, someone could have been just on the other side of the wall without me knowing. It's terrifying to think about, especially considering what could have happened if I had confronted them. My buddy Mark and I share a house together. Mark is quite the party animal and often stays out late or crashes at other people's places. So many nights I end up having the house to myself. One of those nights, Mark was out at a bar or something, so I decided to enjoy the evening alone. I grabbed a couple of beers and sat on the swinging bench we had on the front porch. The weather was pleasant, and since it was close to midnight, most of the neighborhood was asleep, making it quiet. After sitting out for about an hour, I noticed a person walking down the street in front of the houses. He was a large man, wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled over his head. However, something seemed off about the way he moved. His steps were stiff, as if only his legs were functioning while his upper body remained oddly still. When he reached the part of the road in front of my house, he stopped and stared directly at me. I waited a few moments for him to say something, but he just stood there, silently watching me from the middle of the street. "Hey man, do you need something?" I called out. He stayed silent for a moment before he started walking up my driveway. I got up from the bench and shouted at him to leave, but as he got closer, I quickly went inside and locked the door behind me. I peeked through the peephole and saw him approach the door. He paused for a moment, then pulled something from under his sweatshirt. It was hard to make out through the small view I had, but it looked like a hammer or a crowbar. Realizing what might happen next, I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, dialing 911 while trying to stay quiet. I could hear the wood splintering off the door downstairs as I urgently asked the operator for help. Then, there was a loud crash followed by silence, the only sound being the broken door swaying on its hinges. I waited anxiously, expecting to hear his footsteps coming up to the bedroom door at any moment, but the seconds turned into minutes until I finally heard a police car pull into the driveway. I considered running downstairs to meet the officers, but the operator suddenly advised me to stay where I was and wait for the police to come to me. So I sat back down. About 30 seconds later, I heard one of the officers coming up the stairs, followed by shouting and the sound of a taser being fired. The guy had been standing right outside the bedroom door as if he was waiting for me to open it. He was arrested, and as it turns out, he was very drunk. I have no idea who he was or why he did what he did. According to the officers, he wouldn't explain why he was walking down the street or what his intentions were. All I know is if I had opened that door, it could have been the last thing I ever did. This happened in Montana in the late 80s when I was a young teenager during the middle of winter. My family and I lived in a small house deep in the forest. When I say deep in the forest, I mean the closest store and neighbor were at least a 30-minute drive from where we lived. It was probably around 11 p.m., and my dad worked night shifts, so it was just my mom and me at home. It was a typical night until things took a terrifying turn. We had just finished dinner, and my mom was clearing the table. She asked me to wash the dishes, so I started on them. As I was waiting for the cold water to heat up, I noticed the outside lights suddenly went out. My reflection in the window, combined with the light being off, made it very difficult to see, but I could just make out what seemed like a face. Whoever or whatever it was staring directly at me. I was completely shocked but wiped the fog from the window with a cloth to get a clearer view. As soon as I moved the cloth away, a blinding light shone directly at me. I squinted and looked away because it hurt my eyes, but then the light abruptly turned off. I could still see the figure standing at a distance, watching me. My mom then put the remaining dishes in the sink, snapping me out of my daze. I backed away from the window and when my mom asked what was wrong, I told her someone was out there watching me and that they had shined a flashlight into our window. She didn't believe me at first, but I insisted, confused about how she hadn't noticed the light when it flashed on me. She must have had her back turned or something. Why Mom thought I was joking, so she didn't even bother to check. Once I felt a bit safer, I walked back to the window to look outside, but there was no one there. The figure had vanished, which gave me a small sense of relief. But suddenly, the doorknob started rattling as if someone was trying to open the door. My mom screamed, and we both grabbed small kitchen knives. Whoever was outside started pulling on the door even harder and began kicking it, clearly trying to break in. We were incredibly fortunate because my dad arrived just in time. His boss had let him leave work early that night, and if not for that, I believe my mom and I wouldn't have survived. That as soon as my dad pulled into the driveway, the intruder ran off. But my dad didn't hesitate. He shot at the man with his Glock 5 times, hitting him with every shot. The man died within minutes. After confirming that the intruder was dead, my dad took us to the police station to report what happened. My dad didn't face any charges. It was clearly self-defense. When the police arrived at our home, they found that the man was indeed trying to break in. He had a handgun hidden in his pants, along with a sharp 6-inch knife. He also had mace and handcuffs. I don't like to imagine what his intentions were because it still haunts me to this day. I'm just thankful that my dad showed up when he did, and that he took action before anything worse could happen. A few months later, we moved out of that house to a new one that my dad and a few of his friends helped build for us. I lived there for about 5 years until I moved in with my girlfriend in a nearby town. We now have our own apartment, and life has been going well since then. However, this is a story I often find myself telling every now and then.